Hey guys, tonight we step into the dim, humid streets of late 1970s Medellín, where even the air seems to hum with whispers of deals and danger. Somewhere beyond the glow of yellow street lamps, two cousins are walking side by side, their voices low but animated. One is already a dreamer, with a flair for spectacle. The other is quieter, his gaze drawn not to the passing motorbikes or the loud laughter spilling from cantinas, but to the notepad in his hands. That quiet one is Gustavo Gaviria. You probably won't survive this version of Medellín, not because you'll take a bullet, but because the pace of change here is so relentless it could swallow you whole before you even find your footing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. He's 18, tall, but still with a teenager's frame, the kind of build that lets him slip unnoticed through the thick crowds of the Plaza Minorista. Gustavo isn't yet the accountant of an empire. He's just a cousin who prefers ledgers to liquor. Pablo, on the other hand, thrives in chaos. He leans in toward Gustavo, gesturing at a man across the street, a contact who owes them both a small debt. Gustavo notes the amount in his mind instantly, down to the centavo, and decides he'll collect without a scene. That's how he operates, even now. Their bond is forged in small ventures, flipping electronics smuggled through Panama, trading coffee at suspiciously low customs values, testing the edges of what they can get away with. Gustavo watches, listens, and remembers. He learns not just the price of goods, but the price of keeping someone loyal. In Medellín, loyalty isn't measured in words. It's measured in the moments when a man chooses not to betray you. At home, his family sees him as the studious one, the one who might manage a legitimate business someday. He doesn't argue. Every quiet evening at the kitchen table with columns of figures is as important to him as Pablo's brash negotiations in the marketplace. But those evenings are never entirely quiet. Through the open window comes the sound of police sirens, occasional gunfire in distant neighborhoods, and the low, steady hum of a city that never truly sleeps. One night, while balancing a stack of invoices for a shipment they've moved through Cartagena, Gustavo catches Pablo watching him. "You know," Pablo says, "one day these numbers will mean more than gold." Gustavo doesn't answer, but in his head, he's already imagining what that might look like. There's a subtle division of labor forming between them. Pablo draws the deals in. Gustavo makes sure the deals don't collapse under their own weight. It's an arrangement that plays to their strengths and hides their weaknesses. And for a while, it works flawlessly. But Medellín is a city where flawless is temporary. Every good run has an expiration date, stamped invisible on the moment it begins. And while neither cousin says it out loud, they both feel it. A faint, ticking rhythm beneath the laughter and profit. A reminder that sooner or later, something will change. That ticking grows louder when you know where to listen for it. Gustavo has always been good at hearing things other people ignore. The change in tone when a supplier starts talking too quickly. The pause before someone agrees to a deal. The way certain cops linger a little too long outside the cafe they're in. These aren't random moments to him. They're entries in an unwritten ledger, warning signs to be balanced against the day's profits. Pablo teases him sometimes, calling him El Banquero, the banker. To outsiders, it's a joke, but inside the family, it's a kind of respect. Gustavo can run a calculation in his head before a man even finishes naming a price. And more importantly, he can tell whether that price will still make sense after a week of bribes, transport costs, and quiet payoffs to middlemen. It's not glamour, but in a city like Medellín, it's survival. In those years, the city itself is an ecosystem of calculated risk. The legitimate and the illicit run side by side like two rivers that occasionally cross and muddy each other's waters. On Friday nights, Gustavo sometimes walks those narrow streets with Pablo, both of them noting who's meeting who, which bars are suddenly busy, and which faces disappear for weeks at a time. Gustavo doesn't see the street as a threat. He sees it as a balance sheet, where every figure is a person and every person has a value, sometimes more than one. There's one evening that sticks with him for years afterward. The cousins are sitting in the corner booth of a dim cantina, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of overcooked meat. A man slides into the booth, smiling too much, speaking too fast. Pablo leans forward, ready to bargain, but Gustavo keeps his eyes on the man's hands. They're trembling slightly. The deal will fall apart, he realizes, not because the man's price is too high, but because someone else has already bought his loyalty. Later, as they walk home, Pablo asks him how he knew. Gustavo shrugs. Numbers, he says simply. And in his mind, it's true, because trust, risk, and profit are all numbers to him, each one capable of being measured and forecast. Still, even the sharpest forecast can't account for the sudden gusts of change sweeping through Colombia. New players are emerging, routes are shifting, and there's more money moving faster than anyone can quite track. For Gustavo, that's the challenge and the thrill, keeping pace without letting the system crack. The beauty of his role is that it lets him stand in the shadows while the others draw attention. But shadows are not permanent. One late night, as the streets empty and the neon signs buzz like tired bees, he finds himself wondering, what happens when the money gets so big it can't be hidden anymore? What happens when the numbers themselves become a target? In that moment, under the dull glow of a street lamp, he feels the first chill of the future pressing in. It's not fear exactly, more like the awareness that the ledger he's building will one day outgrow the man keeping it. The choice of numbers over bullets is never formal for Gustavo. It's just the way his mind is wired. Even as a boy, he's drawn to the precision of counting, the quiet certainty of figures on a page. In Medellín's working-class neighborhoods, where opportunity often comes with a pistol in hand, Gustavo finds his sense of power in a notebook and a calculator. Pablo might scoff at the idea of avoiding the streets, but he knows better than to underestimate a man who can make sense of chaos without ever firing a shot. By the late 70s, Pablo is climbing into increasingly dangerous circles, but Gustavo keeps a certain distance. He prefers the back rooms to the front lines, the quiet office above a warehouse to the noisy bar where deals are sealed over rum and raised voices. Here, in these rooms filled with the scent of paper and ink, he builds his early role as the cartel's quiet heartbeat, tracking the flow of money so precisely that shipments can be predicted down to the day. He learns quickly that in this line of work, precision isn't just about profit, it's about survival. A missed calculation can mean a shipment arriving late, a payment being short, or worse, a rival interpreting the error as disrespect. Gustavo's ledgers are more than records. They are the invisible map of the empire Pablo is building. In those early years, his system is deceptively simple. Every peso in or out is logged, coded with numbers and symbols only he understands. There are no obvious criminal references, just transactions that, to anyone outside the loop, might look like imports of legitimate goods, minor property purchases, or agricultural investments. Gustavo's genius lies in making the illicit indistinguishable from the mundane. Occasionally, his work requires him to meet with the men whose names fill his books. These encounters test his ability to keep calm under pressure. A smuggler from the coast might arrive in Medellín, rough and sunburned, wanting his cut immediately. Gustavo receives him politely, never raising his voice, offering coffee before sliding an envelope across the desk. His tone stays light, his words precise, never promising more than what's in the envelope, never leaving room for a future dispute. Mainstream history remembers Gustavo as the accountant, but that title doesn't fully capture his influence. Many people still think that accountants simply tally up after the fact, but Gustavo is more like a chess player, thinking 3 moves ahead. Each entry in his books is placed with purpose, each figure carefully aligned with a future plan. Pablo respects this. In private, he admits that without Gustavo, his ambitions might have collapsed under their own weight. Where Pablo thrives on bold risks, Gustavo quietly trims the excess, ensuring the foundation is stable enough to carry the load. But the danger of being indispensable is that you become irreplaceable. And irreplaceable people are high-value targets. Gustavo senses it in the way certain lieutenants glance at him during meetings, their eyes narrowing when Pablo defers to his judgment. Numbers can be powerful, but in Medellín, power always draws attention. Late one night, as he closes his ledger and locks it away in a steel cabinet, Gustavo pauses. The room is silent except for the distant sound of a motorcycle speeding through the barrio. He knows that the real danger in this business isn't always the gun. It's being the one who knows too much. And still, he turns off the light with a steady hand. For now, the books are balanced, the roots are flowing, and the empire is expanding. Tomorrow, there will be more to count. The first tastes of risk arrive quietly for Gustavo, almost disguised as opportunity. It's 1978, and the cousins' operations are still small enough to slip under the radar, but the money is growing faster than expected. A deal in Cali yields triple the anticipated profit, and for the first time, Gustavo finds himself holding more cash in a single day than his father made in a year. The temptation to accelerate is strong. Pablo talks about expanding routes, pushing larger shipments, taking advantage of the moment. Gustavo listens, nodding, but he's already running the numbers in his head, calculating what would happen if a shipment were intercepted, if a pilot failed to deliver, if a partner decided to skim a little off the top. Risk to him is not a vague feeling. It's a measurable cost. One of their earliest laundering schemes involves a chain of small electronics shops in Medellín and Bogotá. Officially, these shops import radios and cassette players from Panama. In reality, the shipments contain carefully packed bricks of cocaine hidden behind panels and inside hollowed-out equipment. Gustavo's role is to ensure the paperwork matches the story, the customs duties are paid without raising suspicion, and the profits flow back clean. In these moments, he discovers a certain thrill, not from the danger, but from the precision it requires. A single misplaced decimal could send everything crashing down, yet Gustavo thrives on getting it right. The pressure sharpens his mind, makes the city's noise fade into the background, until only the numbers remain. But Medellín is changing. There are whispers of police inspectors suddenly taking long vacations, of politicians driving new cars they shouldn't be able to afford, of entire neighborhoods quietly funded by money that never passed through a bank. Gustavo watches it all with the detached curiosity of a man observing a complex machine. Each gear turning another, each movement predictable if you know the pattern. The first time something goes wrong, it's small. A truck carrying one of their shipments breaks down outside of Pereira. The driver panics and leaves the load unattended for nearly an hour. Nothing is stolen, but when Gustavo hears about it, he doesn't dismiss it as bad luck. Instead, he rewrites the delivery schedule, adding buffer times and alternate routes, ensuring that no single delay could ever jeopardize the whole chain. Pablo laughs when he hears about the adjustments. "You think too much," he tells Gustavo. But within months, another partner's shipment is hit during a similar breakdown, costing them thousands. Pablo doesn't laugh then. He just nods and tells Gustavo to keep doing whatever it is he does. These early risks teach Gustavo something essential. Danger doesn't always arrive with a gun. More often, it's hiding in the overlooked details, the missed signature, the forgotten invoice, the unguarded cargo. In the ledger of his mind, these lessons are worth more than gold. And though the stakes are climbing, Gustavo begins to feel that this is his natural place, walking the fine edge between profit and disaster, steadying the balance while others rush ahead without looking down. Counting the blood money becomes Gustavo's quiet craft, an art form wrapped in arithmetic. By 1980, the Medellín operation is no longer a street-level hustle. It's a full-fledged export machine, and every peso, dollar, and franc moving through it passes under his watchful eye. The sums are staggering, even for someone who thinks in numbers the way most men think in words. He doesn't touch the product, doesn't ride along on deliveries, doesn't even visit the airstrips where the small planes take off under cover of darkness. Instead, he sits in an office lined with filing cabinets, a typewriter on one side of the desk and a calculator on the other. In between is the ledger, a thick, leather-bound book that to anyone else might seem like an unremarkable record of transactions. To Gustavo, it's a living map of the empire. Every shipment has a cost. Every bribe has a rate. Every payoff to a politician, every donation to a police unit is penciled in under careful codes. A single shipment to Miami might appear in the books as a coffee order from a plantation that hasn't produced a bean in years. Payments to pilots are listed as consulting fees. Even the losses, planes seized, loads stolen, couriers arrested, are disguised as equipment damage or staff replacement. What separates Gustavo from other men in his position is not just his ability to keep track. It's his ability to see the patterns forming before they become obvious. He notices when a smuggling route begins to lose efficiency, when a buyer's payments are starting to lag, when the cost of bribes in a certain port quietly doubles. To Pablo, these are minor inconveniences. To Gustavo, they're cracks in the foundation. Mainstream history often paints cartel accountants as passive men in suits, but Gustavo is nothing of the sort. His work isn't reactive, it's strategic. Many people still think that the Medellín cartel's power came only from firepower, but what kept it alive for so long was the ability to move rivers of cash without drowning in them. Gustavo was the dam, the sluice gate, and the engineer all at once. Some nights, when the city outside is restless with sirens and bursts of gunfire, Gustavo allows himself a moment to study the total sums. Tens of millions at a time, crossing borders in and out like a tide. It's intoxicating, but he never lets it cloud his judgment. Money, he knows, is only power if it's controlled. unchecked, it can turn on the very people it enriches. There's a story whispered among the men in the cartel about a rival outfit in Mexico that collapsed overnight. Not because the leaders were killed, but because their money vanished into a tangle of debts, untraceable accounts, and betrayals. Gustavo keeps that story in mind every time he picks up his pen. In a city where violence is currency, Gustavo chooses another form of wealth: certainty. He can't stop the bullets, but he can make sure the empire doesn't run out of fuel to fire them. And in Medellín, that makes him just as dangerous as any gunman. Luxury behind closed doors is the privilege Gustavo earns long before most men his age can even afford a car. By the early 1980s, while street-level operatives flaunt gold chains in public, Gustavo keeps his indulgences hidden away in the quiet safety of walled estates. His home on the outskirts of Medellín isn't the largest, nor the most ostentatious, but it's outfitted with imported Italian furniture, crystal decanters that catch the afternoon light, and a private study lined with shelves of leather-bound ledgers and business manuals. He doesn't drink heavily, rarely gambles, and avoids the kind of noisy social circles that draw attention. His pleasures are subtler: an evening glass of aged scotch, the satisfaction of a perfectly balanced ledger, the soft leather of a custom-made chair. These aren't signs of restraint so much as signs of discipline, because Gustavo knows that every unnecessary flash in public is another thread that could be pulled by curious eyes. When Pablo throws one of his infamous parties, Gustavo attends, but never as the loudest voice in the room. He moves through the crowd with polite nods, exchanging a few quiet jokes, then retreats to the corner where business can be discussed away from the chaos. More than once, men have mistaken his reserve for weakness, until they realize that the man with the calm demeanor also knows exactly how much they've been paid, what they owe, and which of their side deals could get them killed if revealed. There is, however, one indulgence he allows himself in private: rare watches. He collects them not for their status, but for the precision of their engineering. A well-made watch, in Gustavo's view, is like a perfect laundering scheme. Every part working in harmony, every movement predictable, the whole device designed to endure. In his study, there's a small glass case holding a dozen of them, ticking quietly in the background as he works. The irony isn't lost on him that while these watches measure time with meticulous accuracy, his own life operates on a far more volatile clock. In Medellín, time can speed up or run out without warning. That's why he keeps his luxuries where they can't be easily taken. Friends and associates sometimes joke that Gustavo's home feels more like a banker's office than the residence of a cartel figure. He takes it as a compliment. In his mind, the point of power is to control it, not to parade it. Still, there are moments when the walls feel too close, when the silence between ticking seconds seems heavy. He knows that the fortune surrounding him isn't built to last forever. Yet for now, behind these closed doors, he has something rare in Medellín: stability. And stability, to Gustavo, is the finest luxury of all. The accountant's shield is not made of steel or Kevlar. It's built from absence, from the spaces where Gustavo's name never appears. While others rise to notoriety through newspaper headlines and police reports, he crafts an image of invisibility. It's not that the authorities don't know who he is. It's that they can't quite place him in the right rooms at the right times. In Medellín's growing underworld, this kind of invisibility is a rare commodity. Gustavo cultivates it with the same precision he applies to his books. He avoids the public celebrations when a big shipment lands, rarely visits the airfields, and never touches the product itself. If asked, he's simply a businessman with investments in import-export ventures, coffee trading, and real estate. Even those who work for the cartel often only see him at a distance, and when they do, it's usually with a polite nod, a measured handshake, and the calm smile of a man who has nothing to hide. This calculated absence serves another purpose. It keeps him alive. Gustavo understands that in Medellín, the men who die first are often the ones who believe their names alone can shield them. Visibility is both a crown and a target. By letting Pablo take the spotlight, whether in philanthropy or in feuds, Gustavo ensures that his own role remains blurry in the eyes of rivals and investigators alike. That doesn't mean he's without influence. Inside the cartel's inner circle, his word carries weight. If Gustavo advises against a route, it's rarely used. If he warns that a buyer is overextending, others pay attention. Pablo's trust in him is absolute, and everyone knows it. That trust acts as an invisible layer of armor, though it's an armor that also binds him to every risk the cartel takes. Occasionally, this shield wavers. There are moments when a police raid comes uncomfortably close to one of his front businesses, or when a rival organization starts asking about the quiet cousin. Each time, Gustavo reacts not with panic, but with subtle adjustments, altering paper trails, moving money across borders, or even closing an operation entirely to avoid scrutiny. He keeps his distance from the bloodier parts of the business. But he's not naive. He knows that every figure in his ledgers is tied, in some way, to violence. That's why he never fully relaxes, even in his most private moments. The shield may protect him from the direct line of fire, but it cannot make him untouchable. In the quiet of his study, he sometimes imagines what it would take to walk away entirely. He runs the calculations in his head. How much money? How many false identities? How many safe houses? The sums are tempting, but the reality is less so. In Medellín, walking away is often just another way of stepping into someone else's crosshairs. For now, the shield holds. The less the world sees of Gustavo Gaviria, the more dangerous he quietly becomes. Medellín's expanding empire is no longer a rumor whispered in the bars. It's a fact felt in the streets, in the ports, in the airspace itself. By 1981, the cartel's network stretches like a web from the coca-growing regions in the south to the luxury condos in Miami Beach. Airstrips appear overnight in the countryside. Fishing boats in the Caribbean carry more than nets. Warehouses in Panama fill and empty in a rhythm only a few can predict. For Gustavo, expansion means more than bragging rights. It means complexity. Every new route, every fresh connection, multiplies the numbers he has to manage. He creates new codes, more intricate than the last, so shipments to California can't be confused with those to Spain, and payoffs in Bolivian pesos can't be mistaken for those in US dollars. The books grow thicker, the pages denser with figures, arrows, and marginal notes only he understands. Where others see chaos in this rapid growth, Gustavo sees a living organism. The Medellín operation breathes, its lungs filling with cocaine and exhaling cash. And just like a living body, it must be kept in balance. Too much product in one market can depress prices. Too much focus on one route invites law enforcement attention. Gustavo moves money like a physician adjusts medicine. Measured doses, timed precisely, always watching for side effects. Still, expansion carries dangers that even his careful calculations can't fully eliminate. Rival groups notice the scale of the cartel's success and start probing for weaknesses. Authorities in the US, Colombia, and beyond begin coordinating in ways they never have before. A shipment that might have moved unnoticed 5 years ago now risks interception by agencies sharing intelligence in real time. This is where Gustavo's value becomes irreplaceable. He doesn't just record the past, he anticipates the future. He shifts shipments days before a tip-off becomes action, reroutes payments before an account is frozen, and dissolves partnerships the moment he senses disloyalty. Pablo may be the face of the empire, but Gustavo is the nervous system, firing signals that keep the whole body moving. One evening, as they drive together through the hills above the city, Pablo points to the sprawling lights below. "All of that," he says, "is ours." Gustavo studies the view for a moment, then shakes his head. "It's not ours until it's paid for," he replies. It's a remark Pablo laughs at, but one that stays with him. In Gustavo's mind, ownership is an illusion unless it's accounted for. And the Medellín empire, expanding, breathing, dangerous, is still, to him, just a very large, very risky set of numbers in a ledger that must remain balanced at all costs. Pablo's trust, Pablo's temper. Two forces as powerful as any shipment the cartel moves. For Gustavo, navigating both is a constant exercise in balance. They are cousins first, business partners second, and yet their dynamic is shaped by the empire growing between them. From the start, Pablo has admired Gustavo's caution. He calls him the one man who can hold the leash on a wolf without getting bitten. In private, they share moments of genuine warmth, quiet dinners at family gatherings, the occasional laugh over childhood memories, a mutual respect built on loyalty that predates the cartel itself. But that trust comes with expectations. Pablo does not ask Gustavo for advice, he expects it. He does not suggest that Gustavo check the numbers. He demands it, certain that the answers will be there. The problem is that Pablo's temper, when provoked, can unravel months of careful planning. Gustavo has seen it more than once. A shipment delayed, a rival making a careless insult, a government official suddenly refusing a bribe. Where Gustavo would look for a solution in the margins of a ledger, Pablo's instinct is to make a statement. Loud, fast, and irreversible. One evening in the early 80s, they're in the back room of a safe house when a courier arrives, sweating and pale. A buyer in Miami has delayed payment on a large shipment, claiming that part of the product was compromised. Pablo's jaw tightens, his voice rising as he talks about sending a message. Gustavo lets him vent for a moment before quietly asking, "Do you want to get paid or get even?" It's a small question, but it shifts the mood. In the end, Pablo follows Gustavo's advice, offering a minor concession to smooth the deal and keep the route open. The payment arrives 2 days later, intact. Moments like this cement Gustavo's role, but they also bind him tighter to Pablo's fate. In a city where loyalty is currency, being the person Pablo trusts most makes him both protected and exposed. Within the inner circle, everyone understands that questioning Gustavo is close to questioning Pablo himself. It earns him deference, yes, but also quiet resentment from those who see him as untouchable. He notices the looks, the whispered conversations that stop when he walks into a room. Numbers might be his shield, but proximity to Pablo is both armor and target. Late at night, after the meetings and the calculations are done, Gustavo sometimes wonders how long trust can last in a business where alliances shift like sand. Trust, after all, is not an entry you can lock in a ledger. It changes, it erodes, and when it breaks, It can shatter faster than even the fastest accountant can record. Shadows in Miami stretch long over Gustavo's work, even though he rarely sets foot in the city. By the early 1980s, Miami is no longer just a gateway. It's the cartel's most lucrative port, the place where cocaine turns from white powder into rivers of clean US dollars. Gustavo oversees it all from Medellín, yet his fingerprints are on every dollar that comes back. He knows Miami's streets without walking them. Little Havana's cafes where deals are whispered over cortaditos, Biscayne Bay's marinas hiding boats with false floors, and downtown's new high-rises bought with cash so fresh it still smells of ink. Associates there send coded messages, numbers that look like shipping invoices, but in reality map the movement of product, payments, and bribes. The challenge is not moving the cocaine. It's making the money behave once it returns. U.S. banks, especially in Florida, are becoming more careful. Gustavo adapts, shifting funds through Panamanian shell companies, converting stacks of cash into cashier's checks, even using casinos to launder large sums in a single night. Each method is another layer of distance between the money's origin and the eyes trying to trace it. But Miami isn't without danger. Law enforcement there is aggressive, and rival traffickers are just as eager to claim the city's wealth. In one tense month, a U.S. federal task force freezes a network of accounts tied, at least on paper, to one of Gustavo's fronts. It takes 3 sleepless nights, a flurry of wire transfers, and a few discreet calls to well-placed contacts for him to reroute the funds before they vanish into government hands. Pablo praises him for the save, but Gustavo takes no pride in it. He sees Miami as a pressure valve. Lucrative, yes, but volatile. Too much attention there, and the heat will spread back to Colombia. He begins to think of the city not as a treasure chest, but as a high-risk asset, profitable only if managed with constant vigilance. Still, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that while other cartel men in Miami are making headlines for flashy arrests, Gustavo's name never appears. He is the shadow behind the shadow, a man who can shift millions without crossing a single border himself, and in a game where distance from the crime scene is often the difference between life and death, that makes Miami both his greatest opportunity and his most dangerous liability. Smuggling with precision is Gustavo's hallmark, and by 1983, the Medellín network runs with a level of efficiency that would impress any legitimate logistics firm. Each route, whether by air, sea, or hidden in commercial shipments, operates on a schedule so tight it could be mistaken for a government postal service. The difference is that no stamps are involved, and the cargo is worth far more than letters. Gustavo's genius lies in eliminating uncertainty. Small planes leaving clandestine airstrips in Colombia land in the Bahamas or remote Florida Keys with fuel calculated down to the liter, refueling only at trusted locations. Containers leaving Barranquilla are loaded with legitimate exports, bananas, coffee, textiles, but each carries hidden compartments designed by craftsmen, paid in cash and silence. Every movement is tracked through his codes, which only a handful of people can read. A simple notation in the ledger, Parcel 48 Ruta Verde, could mean a ton of cocaine bound for Houston, moving under the guise of industrial machinery. If one leg of a route becomes unsafe, Gustavo shifts to another without interrupting the flow. His work demands patience. In the smuggling world, rushing a shipment is asking for disaster. He once delayed a major load for nearly 2 weeks because one of the pilots reported unusual patrol patterns near a landing strip. Pablo grumbled about the lost time, but when news came that another group's plane had been seized in the same area, Gustavo's caution was vindicated. The precision extends beyond movement into the financial aftermath. Payments for a single shipment might pass through 5 countries before they're consolidated, each transfer leaving just enough legitimate paperwork to appear above board. By the time the funds return to Medellín, they are indistinguishable from money earned through coffee exports or real estate sales. Mainstream accounts often credit the cartel's muscle for its survival, but Gustavo knows better. Firepower can win territory, but precision keeps it. Many people still think that smuggling is a matter of speed and luck, but to Gustavo, it's a matter of discipline. An engineer's patience paired with a chess player's foresight. On certain nights, he'll sit with a map spread across his desk, tracing routes with the tip of a pen, imagining each point as a heartbeat in the body of the cartel. As long as the beat stays steady, the empire lives, and as long as Gustavo controls the rhythm, those heartbeats remain strong. When numbers lie, they don't do it loudly. They whisper, slipping through a column here, a decimal there, hiding in the kind of detail most people would skim past. Gustavo, however, has built his entire shield on noticing such whispers. It's why the Medellín cartel's finances hum like a perfectly tuned engine, until the day a single figure in his ledger feels off. It's 1984, and the discrepancy is small, just a missing 2% in a payment from a long-trusted Miami buyer. On paper, it looks like a routine deduction for transport adjustments. Gustavo doesn't buy it. He pulls the records for the last 12 months, scanning the codes like a man rereading an old letter for hidden meaning. There it is again, buried every few transactions, a sliver missing, so small it could pass for rounding error. He keeps the discovery to himself at first. In his world, accusing someone of theft without proof can be as dangerous as letting the theft continue. Quietly, he cross-references shipment weights, payment schedules, and currency conversion rates. By the time he's finished, the truth is clear. Someone on the Miami side has been skimming, slowly, carefully, but consistently enough that over the past year, the loss has climbed into the hundreds of thousands. When he finally brings it to Pablo, the reaction is swift and volcanic. Pablo's instinct is to send a message that will echo for years. Gustavo urges restraint, framing the situation not as betrayal, but as inefficiency, something that can be corrected without drawing the wrong kind of attention. If we make noise, he tells Pablo, we'll have more than a thief to deal with. We'll have the DEA wondering why our books suddenly got interesting. The solution he proposes is elegant and cold. Restructure the payment routes so the skimmer's access disappears without a word. The man keeps his life, but his influence evaporates overnight. To Gustavo, this is justice, measured, silent, and irreversible, but it leaves him uneasy. If someone trusted for years can turn, what about the rest? He begins to tighten his oversight, reviewing payments with an intensity that borders on obsession. Every figure is a potential lie until proven otherwise. In the months that follow, the cartel's finances run smoother than ever. Yet Gustavo feels the shift. Trust has become just another number to monitor. One more line in the ledger that might someday fail him. And in Medellín, when trust collapses, the fall is rarely gentle. Family ties, family risks, two sides of the same coin that Gustavo flips in his mind more often than he'd like. In Medellín, blood loyalty runs deep, but so does the danger of being bound to someone else's decisions. For Gustavo, the bond with Pablo is unshakable in public. Yet in private, He sometimes wonders whether that bond is a shield or a chain. Family dinners at the Gaviria household are a study in contrasts. At one end of the table, uncles and aunts talk about local politics, the rising price of coffee, or which neighbor's son just made it into university. At the other, Pablo and Gustavo speak in low tones about freight schedules, payment clearances, and which routes are beginning to feel too warm. These conversations are careful, never too explicit, never loud enough for younger cousins to overhear, but they're laced with the shared knowledge that the two men's fortunes are intertwined in ways no polite dinner chatter can touch. Gustavo is careful to keep family life and business life in separate rooms, yet Medellín in the 1980s is a city where walls are thin. A relative might innocently mention a trip to Panama, not realizing that name belongs to a shell company funneling millions. A cousin might brag about a new car, not knowing it was bought with laundered funds. Every slip is a risk, and Gustavo has trained himself to hear these slips as clearly as he hears the ticking of his watches. The real danger comes when family members, however distant, want in. A second cousin with vague import-export experience, an in-law with connections in Miami. Even the well-intentioned ones can become liabilities if they get too close to the machinery. Gustavo's polite refusals often offend, but letting them inside would be worse. Once you're in, there's no walking away without consequences. His relationship with Pablo complicates this further. Pablo's generosity toward the family is legendary, paying hospital bills, funding weddings, buying homes. These gestures earn loyalty, but they also bring the family under a brighter spotlight. Gustavo spends as much time shielding relatives from that glare as he does balancing the cartel's books. One afternoon, after helping a younger cousin secure a legitimate job far from cartel business, Gustavo returns to his office feeling a rare sense of relief. It's fleeting. On his desk is a message from Pablo, a request to arrange payments through a family member's business as cover for a large transfer. Gustavo doesn't argue. It's too late for this cousin to be kept at arm's length. The decision has already been made. That night, as he locks the ledger away, Gustavo can't shake the thought that family loyalty, while noble, is also the most unpredictable variable in his calculations. Numbers follow rules. People do not, and in this life, it's often the unpredictable that gets you killed. Quiet rivalries are often more dangerous than open feuds. Gustavo learns this early in the cartel's rise, and by 1985, he can feel the weight of certain stares during meetings, the kind that linger a second too long, carrying questions nobody dares to voice. Within the Medellín hierarchy, he isn't the loudest man, but he is one of the most influential, and that alone breeds tension. Most of these rivalries come from lieutenants who operate closer to the street. They measure their worth in territory controlled, men commanded, and fear inspired. Gustavo measures his in-balance sheets and clean transfers, metrics they don't fully understand, but know are essential to keeping their fortunes intact. That disconnect fuels resentment. It shows in subtle ways. A driver assigned to him arrives late, claiming traffic, even when Gustavo knows the route was clear. A shipment's paperwork is accidentally delayed, forcing him to make last-minute adjustments. Small acts, each one deniable, but together they signal that some in the organization would like to see him stumble. He doesn't respond with confrontation. Instead, he adjusts. If a particular lieutenant's crew starts moving product slower, Gustavo routes around them. If a front company controlled by a rival shows sloppy bookkeeping, he quietly shifts transactions elsewhere. The moves are so understated that most of the offenders don't realize they've been sidelined until the money stops flowing their way. In his private calculations, he keeps a mental ledger, not just of pesos and dollars, but of people, their reliability, their ambitions, their capacity for betrayal. Many people still think that cartel politics are decided entirely by violence, but Gustavo knows influence is often transferred in quieter ways. Who controls the flow of funds? Who decides when payments clear? Who can delay without being questioned? One afternoon, during a tense meeting in a dimly lit warehouse, a rival lieutenant makes a veiled remark about those who never get their hands dirty. The words hang in the air, but Pablo's silence afterward speaks volumes. The room understands. Criticizing Gustavo is a quick way to lose Pablo's favor, yet Gustavo doesn't mistake Pablo's defense for immunity. In a world where alliances shift overnight, today's shield can become tomorrow's spear. Rivalries, even unspoken ones, have a way of resurfacing when pressure mounts, so he stays quiet, keeps his head down, and lets the numbers speak for him. Because in Medellín, quiet men aren't always harmless. They're often the ones pulling the strings. The accountant abroad is a rare sight, but when Gustavo travels, it's never for leisure. By the mid-1980s, his passport bears stamps from places where business hides in plain sight. Panama City, Nassau, San Jose. Officially, these trips are tied to import-export ventures, property inspections, or investment meetings. Unofficially, they're the connective tissue holding the cartel's international cash flow together. Panama becomes a favorite hub, not because Gustavo enjoys the humid air or the crowded markets, but because its banks have perfected the art of discretion. He meets quietly with lawyers who speak in euphemisms and bankers who never ask for the true origin of a deposit. In the lobby of a luxury hotel overlooking the bay, a briefcase changes hands, no louder than a sigh, and millions of dollars begin their journey through a labyrinth of accounts. These trips demand a different kind of caution. At home, Gustavo can rely on the shield of Pablo's presence. Abroad, he is just another man in a suit, exposed to airports, customs agents, and the chance of a curious official asking the wrong question. To counter this, he keeps his appearances brief, in and out within days, sometimes within hours, leaving no trail of dinners, shopping, or sightseeing. Once, in Nassau, a meeting with a British banker runs longer than planned. The man, amiable and a little too talkative, mentions that he's been approached by other Colombian interests, offering higher deposits. Gustavo files the information away, masking his concern with a polite smile. Competition abroad is as real as in Medellín, and foreign rivals can be just as unpredictable as local ones. Mainstream history often frames cartel travel as a matter of luxury, with images of leaders vacationing on yachts. Gustavo's reality is far from that. His hotel rooms are chosen for their exits, not their views. His meals are functional, taken quickly and without fanfare. Many people still think that being abroad means freedom, but for Gustavo, it's another form of confinement. Only this time, the walls are made of vigilance. When he returns to Medellín, he carries no souvenirs. The only proof of his journeys lies in the ledgers, new deposits, adjusted transfers, cleaner balances. The empire's heart may beat in Colombia, but its veins stretch far beyond, and Gustavo ensures that the blood keeps flowing without clot or pause, and each time he steps back onto Colombian soil, he feels the same quiet relief. Home may be dangerous, but at least here, he knows exactly where the danger lives. Hints of a storm start small, like hairline cracks in a wall you've walked past 1,000 times. By 1986, Gustavo begins to notice patterns in the chatter coming from both the streets and the high offices. Patterns that suggest law enforcement is shifting its focus. Where raids once targeted shipments and low-level operatives, there is now a growing interest in the money itself. It begins with isolated events. A mid-tier front company in Bogotá is audited without warning. A Panamanian banker, one of Gustavo's oldest points of contact, suddenly retires, replaced by a man who asks too many questions. A long-trusted courier returning from Miami is detained for several hours, not because of drugs, but because he's carrying ledgers disguised as sales records. For most in the cartel, these incidents are nuisances, the kind of random setbacks that have always happened. But Gustavo doesn't believe in coincidences. He notices that the new scrutiny isn't about where the cocaine goes. It's about where the dollars land when it gets there. The real warning comes during a routine meeting in a Medellín safe house. One of Pablo's political contacts, usually relaxed, arrives visibly uneasy. Between sips of coffee, he mentions that Colombian authorities are receiving more direct intelligence from the United States than ever before, bypassing some of the local officials the cartel has long paid to keep things quiet. The name Financial Crimes Division surfaces in the conversation for the first time. Gustavo understands immediately. The empire's strength, the flow of money, is about to become its greatest vulnerability. Violence can scare off rival traffickers, but it cannot intimidate an international banking system that's beginning to cooperate across borders. He doesn't panic. Instead, he quietly begins reinforcing the web. Accounts are moved, shell companies dissolved and rebuilt under fresh names, ledgers split into smaller, more compartmentalized books. If investigators come knocking, they'll find only fragments, numbers without context, trails that vanish into dead ends. Many people still think that the Medellín cartel fell only because of bullets and betrayals, but Gustavo knows the storm was brewing long before the shooting started. It began the moment the world realized that following the money was easier than finding the cocaine. At night, in his study, he hears the ticking of his watches more acutely than ever. Each tick feels like a countdown, not to the collapse of the empire, but to the day when his quiet role will no longer protect him from the storm outside. The net tightens slowly, but Gustavo feels each strand drawing closer. By 1987, international cooperation has evolved from a political talking point into a daily reality. Colombian authorities now share operational updates with their U.S. counterparts in real time. Bank records that once took months to request can now be transmitted overnight. The invisible borders that once protected the cartel's finances are fading. At first, the changes are subtle. A wire transfer that used to clear in 24 hours now takes 3 days. A Panamanian lawyer who handled offshore accounts politely declines a new deposit, citing procedural reforms. Even the casual conversations Gustavo has with certain bankers grow shorter, tighter, as if every word might be overheard. For the Medellín leadership, these are just bureaucratic headaches, frustrations to be overcome by bribes or intimidation. For Gustavo, they are signs of a structural shift. This isn't about one route, one shipment, or one compromised account. It's about the system itself beginning to close ranks. One morning, while reviewing the books, he notices something unusual. A series of transactions routed through a Caribbean bank have been flagged for enhanced verification. The term is new to him, and he doesn't like it. When he calls the bank's director, an old acquaintance, the man's voice carries a nervous edge. "They're watching everything now," he says. "Not just the accounts with obvious risks. Everything. Gustavo spends the next weeks dismantling and reconfiguring entire chains of payment. He breaks large sums into dozens of smaller deposits, each moving through different countries before converging again. It's slower, costlier, but it reduces the risk of a single point of failure. Still, he knows there's no such thing as a perfect defense. The more the net tightens, the greater the chance that something or someone will get caught. He starts holding meetings in smaller groups, often without Pablo present, to discuss contingency plans. Only a few trusted lieutenants understand the scope of the threat. Most others are too focused on the immediate battles, rival gangs, police raids, political shifts, to see the larger game at play. Many people still think the Medellín cartel's operations were undone by spectacular acts of violence, but Gustavo sees the truth. The real danger is the slow suffocation of the empire's financial lungs. Without the constant flow of clean money, the empire will choke, no matter how many guns it owns. Late at night, he sits by the window, looking out at the faint orange glow of Medellín's skyline. The city feels closer now, as if the walls are inching inward. He has always been a man who can find space to maneuver. Now, for the first time, he wonders if the space is running out. Keeping calm under fire is not just a skill for Gustavo, it's a necessity. By 1988, the raids are no longer rumors whispered in cafes. They're regular events, executed with surgical precision and backed by intelligence Gustavo knows didn't originate in Colombia alone. The first time one hits close enough to rattle the inner circle, it's a warehouse in the outskirts of Medellín. The front company there was one of Gustavo's cleaner operations, a textile exporter that moved product only once every few months to avoid suspicion. At dawn, the place is swarmed by heavily armed police. No cocaine is found, but several employees are arrested and, more troubling to Gustavo, the office safe is emptied of ledgers. He arrives hours later, after the police have left, stepping into the damp silence of a building that feels smaller, without the hum of its machines. The employees who remain avoid his eyes. He knows what they're thinking. If the police got the books, it's over. But Gustavo doesn't panic. Instead, he walks into the manager's office, closes the door, and pulls out a backup ledger hidden in the false bottom of a filing cabinet. The one the police took? A decoy, prepared months in advance, filled with numbers that point to nowhere. His calm is not for show. In moments like this, panic is contagious, and the Medellín machine can't afford an outbreak. He speaks slowly to the staff, assuring them that business will resume, that their jobs are safe, that nothing has been lost. He knows most of them won't believe him, but the tone matters more than the content. A week later, another raid hits a small warehouse in Barranquilla, this one tied to a rival faction within the cartel. The difference in response is stark. There, the managers flee, the employees scatter, and valuable documents are left behind. Gustavo makes a mental note. The enemy isn't just law enforcement, it's instability. Many people still think that surviving in the cartel means being the fastest to react. But Gustavo understands it's about being the slowest to lose control. The more the walls close in, the more deliberate he becomes. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't let urgency cloud his judgment, and yet he feels the strain. Every knock at the door makes his shoulders tighten. Every unknown number on the office phone prompts a quiet calculation. Friend, foe, or trap? He's still the calm center of Pablo's empire, but he can feel the cracks forming under the surface, and no amount of smooth talking or careful bookkeeping can erase the fact that the storm is no longer on the horizon. It's here. Allies with their own agendas are as much a part of the Medellín cartel as the cocaine itself. Gustavo has always known that loyalty in this world is rarely absolute. It's conditional, transactional, and often temporary. By 1988, as the empire weaves through its most profitable and dangerous years, he begins to see cracks in relationships he once considered stable. These allies aren't strangers. Some have been in the business since the early days: pilots who flew the first shipments, financiers who built the earliest laundering channels, middlemen who bridged Medellín and Miami. But prosperity changes people. The same man who once valued discretion now wants his name whispered in the right circles. The cautious partner who avoided risk now pushes for bolder, riskier routes. One of the first signs comes from Panama. A banker who has quietly moved millions for the cartel suddenly starts delaying transfers, citing compliance issues that never used to exist. When Gustavo probes deeper, he discovers that the man has been entertaining offers from a rival Colombian network. Better rates, bigger deposits, promises of influence. The betrayal isn't outright yet, but it's close enough to smell. In Miami, another contact, a logistics broker, begins requesting unusually large advances for upcoming expenses. Gustavo recognizes the tactic, a way to gather capital for a side operation. He doesn't confront the man directly. Instead, he reroutes future payments through a different intermediary, effectively cutting the broker out without a word. The most delicate case, however, is closer to home. Within the cartel itself, a regional commander begins to undermine Gustavo's decisions in meetings, subtly questioning his caution in front of Pablo. It's a calculated move, meant to paint Gustavo as overly careful, while others posture as bolder, more profitable operators. Pablo doesn't bite, but Gustavo files the incident away in his mental ledger of potential threats. Many people still think that the danger in the cartel comes only from the outside: police, rival gangs, governments. Gustavo knows better. The most damaging blows often come from the men who sit at the same table, drink the same coffee, and toast to the same victories. He adjusts accordingly. Financial channels are split between more hands, so no single ally can see the entire flow. Sensitive shipments are assigned only to those who have proven themselves in the past year, regardless of old loyalties. Trust is no longer a blanket. It's a patchwork quilt, stitched from necessity, constantly checked for holes. At night, as he closes the day's ledger, Gustavo thinks about the irony. In a business where loyalty is sold as the ultimate virtue, survival depends on treating everyone, friend or foe, as a potential liability. Numbers turn to names when the ledgers stop being abstract tools and start becoming evidence. By 1989, the quiet codes Gustavo has perfected for over a decade are no longer invisible to everyone. Somewhere, in an office he's never seen, investigators are learning to read them. The shift begins with a raid in Cali. It's not even on a cartel property, but on a legitimate import firm that unknowingly handled goods tied to one of Gustavo's laundering channels. When the police open the company's safe, they find a slim notebook. Nothing dramatic, just columns of figures, shipping references, and initials. The problem is that one of those initials belongs to a pilot Gustavo knows personally. Within weeks, rumors circulate that a specialized financial crimes unit is building link charts, diagrams that map names to companies, companies to accounts, accounts to cash deposits. For years, Gustavo's codes have shielded the cartel's core, but the patterns are starting to become visible, like ink bleeding through paper. One afternoon, in a meeting at Pablo's Hacienda Nápoles, Gustavo brings it up. The others dismiss his concern, insisting that the codes are unbreakable. But Gustavo knows better. Codes are only safe until someone decides to spend the time breaking them. And now, the other side seems willing to invest that time. He begins rewriting everything. The master ledger is split into multiple books, each using a different cipher. Some shipments are tracked by weights and colors, others by dates and invented currencies. Payments are disguised not only as legitimate transactions, but as losses. Tax write-offs, failed investments, property depreciation. If someone tries to follow the money, they'll find it looping back on itself like a maze. Still, he can't ignore that every figure represents a person, someone who could be arrested, questioned, flipped. The thought gnaws at him. A name in a ledger is a liability, even if it's only an initial. He starts limiting the information each associate has. A pilot no longer knows the buyer's identity. A buyer no longer knows the origin point. Compartmentalization becomes as critical as the numbers themselves. Many people still think of cartel accountants as mere record keepers, but Gustavo feels more like a forger of identities, creating false financial lives for real people to hide behind. Each entry he writes now carries the weight of a man's survival. Late at night, with the study lamp casting long shadows across his desk, he stares at a page of clean, unmarked paper before making the first notation. The page feels heavier than it should, as if it already knows the names it will eventually hold. Medellín under siege doesn't look like a single battle. It's 100 small ones happening at once. By 1989, the city feels tense in every direction. The streets are lined with military checkpoints, helicopters thrum overhead, and entire neighborhoods live in the shadow of raids. For the cartel, this is more than a public relations nightmare. It's a logistical chokehold. The most immediate strain is on movement. Trucks once able to pass through the countryside in a day now take 3, weaving around roadblocks and patrols. Airstrips are raided more frequently, forcing pilots to take off from riskier improvised locations. The efficiency Gustavo has built over the years begins to fray, not because his system is flawed, but because the environment it operates in is collapsing. From his office, Gustavo monitors every disruption like a surgeon watching a patient's vital signs. He notes which shipments are delayed, which routes are no longer viable, which payments arrive short because someone along the chain had to spend more on bribes just to keep moving. Each new variable forces him to recalculate, not just in pesos or dollars, but in time. A resource the cartel is burning faster than ever. Pablo, under mounting pressure, responds the way Gustavo feared he might, with escalation. Assassinations, car bombs, and public threats against judges and politicians dominate the headlines. Gustavo understands the logic. Intimidation has worked before, but he also knows it accelerates the siege. Every explosion adds another layer of scrutiny, making it harder to move not just product, but money. Inside the organization, the strain deepens rivalries. Lieutenants who once cooperated now guard their own operations like fortified islands, unwilling to share resources for fear they'll be seized or compromised. In meetings, Gustavo notices the change in tone, less discussion of growth, more of survival. Or, many people still think the Medellín cartel was at its most powerful during this period, but Gustavo can feel the reality in his ledgers. Power on paper means nothing if the numbers are shrinking. if shipments are slower, if payments arrive with delays. What he sees is not strength, but a machine running hot, burning through fuel faster than it can be replaced. At night, the city outside his study is restless. Gunfire in the distance, sirens weaving through the hills. He closes his ledgers and steps to the window, watching the faint flicker of explosions far off. Medellín has always been a dangerous place, but now it feels like a trap with the walls pressing inward. And Gustavo knows that in a siege, even the best accountant can only buy time. Pablo's paranoia grows in proportion to the siege around them. By 1990, the trust that once bound the cartel's inner circle begins to erode under the constant weight of betrayal fears. Gustavo, who has always been the calm counterbalance to his cousin's volatility, now finds himself spending as much time managing Pablo's mood as managing the money. Meetings feel different. Where once Pablo leaned back in his chair and listened, now he leans forward, eyes narrowed, interrupting, demanding specifics he never used to question. He double-checks numbers Gustavo has already verified, asks for reports twice in the same week, and occasionally makes sudden changes to plans without warning. The shift isn't baseless. Raids have turned up more information than they should have, and someone is clearly feeding details to the authorities. The problem is that Pablo's suspicion doesn't discriminate. Longtime allies, new recruits, even family members are under the same harsh glare. Gustavo knows the danger here. Once paranoia takes root, loyalty no longer matters, only the perception of loyalty. One evening, Pablo storms into Gustavo's office holding a crumpled report. A shipment routed through the Caribbean has been seized, and Pablo is convinced someone tipped off the Americans. "Find out who," he snaps. Gustavo reads the report slowly, calmly, and sees what Pablo doesn't. There's no sign of betrayal here, just bad luck and increased patrols. But explaining that to a man in Pablo's current state feels like walking a tightrope. He chooses his words carefully, suggesting changes to the route rather than absolving anyone outright. The goal is to redirect Pablo's focus without fanning the flames of his suspicion. It works for now, but Gustavo can feel how fragile the balance is. Many people still think that paranoia is just a side effect of power, but in this world, it's also a survival mechanism. The danger is when it begins to consume the very relationships that power depends on. At night, Gustavo sits in his study, reviewing the books. The numbers are harder to balance now, not just because of the siege outside, but because of the instability within. Trust, once their greatest asset, is depreciating like a bad investment. And Gustavo knows there's no formula that can restore it once it's gone. An offer to vanish comes quietly, without drama, and from a source Gustavo trusts enough to hear out. It's early 1990, and the siege on Medellín has reached a point where even those in the inner circle are weighing exit strategies. The proposal is simple in words, impossible in reality. Disappear before the worst arrives. The man making the offer is an old contact from Panama, a banker who has been moving cartel funds for over a decade. In the muted privacy of a Bogotá hotel suite, he lays out the plan. Within 48 hours, Gustavo could be on a flight to Europe under a false identity. His assets already positioned in accounts unreachable by Colombian or U.S. authorities. The network is prepared, the documents ready. On paper, it's flawless. But Gustavo's life isn't on paper. It's bound by blood, by Pablo, by a role he didn't just accept, but built himself. Disappearing would mean leaving behind the ledgers, the system, and the trust that has kept the empire's financial heart beating. It would also mean abandoning family, not all of whom could follow him. He doesn't reject the offer immediately. Instead, he spends the next week considering it in the quiet spaces between meetings, replaying the banker's words while reviewing payment chains and shipment schedules. The logic is undeniable. The net is tightening. The risk is growing, and escape is worth more now than it ever will be again. But the choice is never just between staying and going. Leaving means forfeiting influence, surrendering the ability to protect the operations and the people still inside. It means allowing others, less careful, to control what he's kept balanced for years. Many people still think that when danger closes in, survival is the only priority. Gustavo knows that in Medellín, survival is also about what you can live with afterward. If he runs, he lives. But he lives as a man who walked away from the one person who trusted him completely. In the end, he tells the banker no. Not out of defiance, but because he understands that disappearing is not freedom if the cost is leaving everything that defines you behind. Still, that night, as he closes his ledger, he writes a small note in the margin, barely visible. Exit routes. Review quarterly, just in case. The day the ledger closed begins like any other, a detail that will trouble Gustavo's family for years afterward. It's July 1990, and Medellín wakes under a thin blanket of cloud, the kind that makes the mountains look closer than they are. Gustavo is in his study before breakfast, as usual, reviewing overnight reports from Panama and Miami. The numbers are steady enough to keep his mood calm, though the tension in the city hangs as heavy as the air. He spends the morning with two trusted aides, finalizing adjustments to a laundering route that's been under scrutiny. At midday, he takes a call from Pablo. The conversation is brief, almost routine. They talk about a shipment delayed in Costa Rica, the need to rotate couriers more often, and a cousin's upcoming wedding. Pablo's voice is steady, but Gustavo senses the underlying strain. They part with the usual words, half business, half family. Cuídate, primo. In the afternoon, Gustavo leaves the house to meet with a contact who's been holding sensitive documents for him. The meeting takes place in a quiet residential neighborhood, far from the usual cartel haunts. They talk for less than 30 minutes. He leaves with a folder tucked under his arm, the contents later found to be mundane: property deeds, false invoices, and coded notes only he could decipher. The ambush comes just as he's getting into his car. Witnesses later say there was no warning, no shouted threat, no argument. Two motorcycles glide up beside him, their riders calm, precise. The first shots shatter the passenger window. The second volley is deliberate, aimed to end the job. When the gunfire stops, the motorcycles are already gone, weaving through traffic like shadows. Gustavo's driver is unhurt but frozen, staring at the still figure in the seat beside him. The folder lies open on the floor, papers fanned across the mat, numbers and codes scattered like the pieces of an unfinished puzzle. News of the killing reaches Pablo within the hour. Those close to him say it is one of the few times he is truly silent, the kind of silence that can only come from a wound too deep for words. Many people still think of Gustavo as just the cartel's accountant, a man behind a desk. But the precision of his death, the clean getaway, the absence of witnesses willing to speak, suggests otherwise. This was no random act. Someone knew exactly where he would be and what removing him would mean. And in that moment, the ledger of the Medellín cartel loses the only man who ever kept it perfectly balanced. Echoes in empty rooms begin with small sounds. A drawer that slides without its measured stop. a chair that no longer scrapes the floor at the same angle, a wall clock that ticks a little too loudly because the person who usually wound the other clocks has not been here to keep them honest. In Gustavo's house, absence becomes a texture. The study door sits ajar for days, as if polite enough to wait for footsteps that will not cross the threshold. On the desk, a square of dust outlines where a favorite ledger used to rest between work sessions, and the glass case of watches keeps time for a man who no longer needs it. Family gathers. The way families do when they cannot absorb an event alone. Voices murmur in the hall. Someone brews coffee that grows cold in untouched cups. A cousin places a folded handkerchief on the desk and leaves it there, as if grief is a spill to be blotted up with fabric and patience. The older aunts speak prayers softly, words like gauze. The younger ones keep their hands busy with trays and towels because motion is easier than remembering. A boy, too young to understand the machinery of Medellín, runs a fingertip down the glass that covers the watches, fogging it for a moment before an uncle gently moves him away. Closest to the center, where the loss burns hottest, sits a woman with the quiet posture of someone who has carried secrets as a daily weight. She focuses on small certainties, the smell of paper and leather in the study, the faint citrus of the polish Gustavo liked for the desk, the way afternoon light turns the floorboards gold. She hears, as he did, the city's distant hum and knows without checking the clock that it is almost the hour when he would have closed the ledger and taken a slow walk through the garden. She breathes in, holds, breathes out, and tries to keep the room from tilting. Allies arrive too, carefully, at staggered times, respectful of the unspoken choreography that governs the aftermath of a death like this. They speak in lowered tones on the patio, not just out of respect for grief, but because the air itself feels wired. A pilot stands with his cap in hand. A lawyer with impeccable cuffs keeps staring at his shoes. A warehouse manager brings a folder of neatly typed inventories and then realizes how absurd it looks to show a list to a widow. The folder stays unopened. Inside the cartel, the initial reaction is not strategy, but silence. Men who are rarely at a loss for words spend long minutes saying nothing, tracing circles on tabletops with their thumbs, polishing already clean sunglasses. Pablo's first instructions are practical. Tighten security, cancel 2 meetings, move certain records to a new location. But even those orders carry the hush of someone speaking in a church. When he does speak of Gustavo, the words are simple, stripped of performance. This is unusual enough that his lieutenants glance at one another, unsure where to place their eyes. Facts intrude, as they always do. The city's radio bulletins report a killing in a quiet neighborhood, carefully not naming which quiet neighborhood. Newspapers hint at a targeted attack, professional, the kind that leaves no mess a camera can capture. In the days that follow, a few outlets print the year's roll call of violence, and somewhere between the dates and the names sits a reminder that the war of 1989 has bled into 1990 with no sign of easing. Judges still travel in armored convoys. The search block steps up operations. Bank regulators meet with international partners about new reporting standards. A historian will later call this period a hinge year, when pressure from courts, treaties, and coordinated policing begins to constrict more tightly than any single raid could manage. For the men who kept time by Gustavo's ledger, the practical problem is immediate and simple. Who signs? Who totals? Who verifies? He did not just count. He forecast. He did not just authorize payments. he synchronized them so nothing arrived out of rhythm. In the first week, 3 separate payments stall because each assumed the other would release once Gustavo nodded them through. Paper moves, but confidence hesitates. A bookkeeper phones at midnight to ask a question nobody had to ask last month. Which account replaces the Panamanian channel, now compromised by attention? The answer, once quick and clean, takes 3 calls and a dawn meeting. Information closest to the character is the kind that hides in muscle memory. Pablo feels it in his hands when he leans back and realizes there is nobody across the table rolling a pen between forefinger and thumb while weighing outcomes. He feels it when a report lands and instinctively looks for a margin note that used to appear in the same tidy hand, a pair of numbers that meant proceed if and only if. At the first meeting without Gustavo, he taps the tabletop twice before speaking, an unconscious mimic of the beat Gustavo gave when he had reached a conclusion. He stops himself. The room hears the pause and fills it with its own heartbeat. Grief, in a place like this, cannot be public. It becomes a series of substitutions. A lieutenant who never spoke to the family now delivers groceries. A driver who usually waited in the car steps into the foyer to ask if the household needs a different route to market, one with fewer checkpoints. A cousin volunteers to handle the garden, then spends an hour in the study doorway without crossing the threshold. People try to be useful. Medellín does not always allow that, but people try anyway. There is also fear, clean as a new blade. If someone could reach Gustavo with that precision, who is safe? Names circulate in whispers, rivals who profit from this, allies who know too much now that the one man who kept the big picture in his head is gone. A map of the empire exists, but only in fragments, because he designed it that way. The very compartmentalization that protected them leaves them disoriented without him. It is a strange safety. No single person can betray the whole, yet no single person can now hold it together. Across the city, rooms echo in other ways. A banker sits at his desk and rereads instructions he once took as gospel, then feeds them into a shredder because paper feels suddenly dangerous. A corrupt official silently returns a second envelope. Overpayment, he says, though both men know the real reason is that his signature might now stand out. In a Miami condo, a man opens a wall safe, sees stacks banded and labeled in the tidy script he learned to trust, and shuts it again with both palms, as if sealing in a temperature he cannot afford to lose. In the house where the watches tick on, night gathers. The woman with the steady posture closes the study door for the first time, not to seal it, but to promise herself that the room will still be there tomorrow. She runs her fingertips along the leather chair, back the way he used to when thinking. On the desk, beneath a blotter, she finds a small note in his hand. 2 columns, risk, reserve, with tiny arrows pointing toward a third word, family. She presses the paper flat and leaves it where it lay. A quiet instruction that doesn't need decoding, debate, the kind that scholars will have later in calm voices removed from sirens, will circle questions of intent and consequence. Was the exact date of his death a turning point or a symptom? Did the collapse that followed owe more to law, to war, or to the slow implosion of trust? Listeners, what do you believe when all 3 forces act at once? The rooms that hold those debates will be bright and safe. These rooms, for now, are shadowed and careful. By week's end, the operation regains a fraction of its rhythm. Not because someone replaces Gustavo, but because necessity forces new habits. A trio does the work one man used to do alone, and they learn how much weight he bore by counting how many hands now tremble. The ledgers, reassembled from fragments, start to breathe again, shallow, uncertain breaths, but breaths nonetheless. And beneath it all, Medellín does what Medellín always does. It keeps moving. Buses crowd the avenues, street vendors shout prices. A late afternoon rain sweeps grit from sidewalks and leaves the air smelling of wet concrete and orange peels. The city takes the sound of gunfire, the hush of mourning, the scratch of pens and makeshift offices, and folds them into its daily noise. A city's memory is a long ledger, and on this page, under this date, a line remains open. Balance unsettled, echo ongoing. The accountant's legacy is measured not only in money that moved, but in the sudden, aching silence that follows when the moving stops. In the weeks after Gustavo's murder in July 1990, routines that once seemed unbreakable begin to stutter. A pilot calls at dawn and doesn't know whom to confirm weights with. A procurement man in the Valle hears 3 different instructions about how to pay a customs officer and chooses the safest option. He waits. Waiting, in this business, turns profit into rumor. Inside the circle, they try to imitate his calm. 3 men share his old role for a while, one good with banks, one with roots, one with the political calendar, but none can do the work with that same unhurried, nearly invisible continuity. What made Gustavo singular wasn't only his memory or his math. It was the way he kept all the parts breathing together, how he could feel the pulse of the machine without raising his voice. Now, each part inhales on its own schedule. The rhythm breaks, then breaks again. Practical consequences appear first on paper, then in streets. Cash that used to arrive in measured tides now lands in irregular, panicked waves, clogging safe houses and overflowing apartments. Storage becomes a risk in itself. Couriers press for quick disbursement. Lieutenants complain that bribes must be doubled because officials smell improvised management. The ledgers, rebuilt in fragments, develop rough edges where his handwriting had once been smooth. A banker in Panama, long confident in the signature he knew by sight, asks for additional assurances and then, unexpectedly, for time. Time, he says, is the new compliance. Pablo feels the absence in places numbers cannot reach. He sits across tables that used to be balanced by a pair of quiet eyes and a pen turning slowly between fingers. When he speaks in strategy sessions, he sometimes stops mid-sentence, as if waiting for an objection that no longer comes. He does not say Gustavo's name often, but men who have been with him since the first small deals notice that he touches the tabletop twice before issuing an instruction, then draws his hand back, letting the air fill a space a cousin once filled. Information closest to the character is always small like that. A gesture, a pause, a reflex you wouldn't write down unless you'd watched him 1,000 evenings in a row. On the city's larger stage, there are facts no one can dispute. In August 1990, Colombian security forces celebrate a string of operations in Medellín. Headlines list seizures, arrests, and the names of officers promoted for results. Pablo's enemies take public bows. His allies adopt lower profiles, or new surnames, or new routes that feel older because they are less efficient. Judges continue to ride in armored convoys. The search block grows more confident in raids that aim for records and radios as much as for cargo. International banks roll out fresh reporting procedures and, for the first time, middle managers at foreign branches turn away deposits they would have accepted the year before. The air itself seems to change, The city inhales information and exhales pressure. For those who loved him, legacy is domestic, a study left tidy enough to be a comfort. On his desk, a small square of paper with 2 columns, risk, reserve, and an arrow toward a single word, family. In the watch case, everything still ticks, obedient to the smallest movement. A calendar on the wall has one future date circled for a relative's wedding, and nothing beyond it. The ordinary tenderness of these artifacts makes the larger machine outside feel crude by comparison. There are stories, of course. Medellín always tells stories. Men who hated each other agree on at least one, that Gustavo was less replaceable than anyone knew until he was gone. A pilot says he once called at 3 a.m, sure he'd wake the accountant's temper, and instead heard a voice that sounded newly awake. Ask 3 questions, and end the call with a single word. Proceed. A warehouse manager remembers the way a fingertip paused above a total before he would nod. If the pause was longer than a heartbeat, some number downstream would soon change. A lawyer swears Gustavo could predict, to the week, when a politician's courage would fail, and which substitute would cost 20% less for the same signature. None of this makes headlines. All of it keeps men cautious in rooms where bravado used to grow. Legacy, too, is a vanishing. Some wealth dissolves precisely as he designed it to do if something ever happened to him. Accounts that responded only to his particular key combinations stop responding to anybody. A front company in Barranquilla closes with graceful finality. Clean books, satisfied tax authorities, a farewell luncheon for staff, and then never exists again. Names that once depended on his ledgers for context become useless to investigators. They sit in files like unpaired socks. The operation still moves, but older maps of it no longer apply. That was part of his last gift. A system that was safest when no single brain, including his, held every thread for long, and yet the machine cannot survive on security features alone. The part of the work that was intuition cannot be taught quickly. Knowing when a pilot is lying by his choice of adverbs, reading a banker's appetite for risk from the way he replaces a pen cap, hearing in a courier's silence that he has paid the wrong police captain. These are senses built over years of patient listening. The men who inherit his chair try to build those senses in weeks. In a city that keeps time by sirens as well as church bells, weeks are not always granted. Some nights the city sounds exactly as it did before. Motorcycles sowing lines of sound through the hills, radios hissing soccer scores, small fireworks marking somebody's birthday. On those nights, it is almost possible to believe that the ledger might be set right again, that a new equilibrium could be constructed from pieces and caution. Then a raid knocks out 2 offices in a single morning, or a wire room in Panama goes dark for 48 hours, or a trusted buyer in Miami asks an unexpected question about origin rather than price. Balance is not a posture you can hold without a spine, and the empire's spine had been a man with a pen. What remains is a lesson disguised as a life. Gustavo proved that the most decisive power in a violent enterprise could come from someone who preferred the back room to the front page. He showed that invisibility is a craft, that precision can be shelter, that devotion to a cousin in a city can build something terrifyingly efficient, and that all of it is mortal. Do you remember the day he left with the first money, when streets and sums were still small enough to memorize? When a promise could be kept in a notebook in a pocket? The city remembers. It keeps its ledgers differently now, but it remembers. His legacy is not a statue, nor a song. It is the way certain men sign their names more slowly. It is the way a widow closes a study door and leaves the watches ticking. It is 100 small hesitations that save lives or cost fortunes, depending on who learned what. It is also the proof that a fortune of blood will always ask to be counted by someone who can stand to look at it, and that, even counted perfectly, it still weighs more than a life. The room softens, as rooms do when voices fade and busy hands finally rest. Street sounds drift to a hush. Distant engines become a slow, even murmur, like a tide forgetting its hurry. Let the air be easy now. Let your shoulders lower by a finger's width, then another. You have walked through heavy places tonight, ledgers and alleys and rooms where the clock ticked too loud, and you have come out the other side. No more sums for now, no more doors left ajar, just breath and a chair that holds you without question. Picture a desk in late evening. The lamp turned low, the paper cleared, the glass watch case reflecting a quiet stripe of light. There is nothing to decide here. The city beyond the window is only suggestion, a scatter of gold pins on velvet hills. You are not expected anywhere. The phone will not ring. Somewhere, rain begins in a patient pattern, dot by dot by dot, smoothing edges from every thought it touches. In that rhythm, the mind loosens. Names unhook themselves from worries, routes fold back into maps, numbers float light as dust and then disappear. What remains is simple: a steady breath moving in and out, a gentle weight at your back, the agreeable sense that the world is happy to go on without you for a while. You may rest as long as you like. If there is a final image to keep, let it be a closed ledger and a window cracked just enough to let the cooler air in. Beyond it, the city keeps its vigil. Within, the room keeps its promise. Quiet is doing the work now. The night knows what to do.